We push back all the time. Why is the government not doing this? But when you work in the not-for-profit sector, you find that there's an entire fourth sector that is doing the wicked problem solving for government. Is it government's job to mobilise the whole system's response, or is the whole system responsible? So if government was meant to be responsible, they've failed, but I don't think they're meant to be responsible. I think we're meant to have organisations delivering on this because they're closer to community and able to respond more readily to community needs, because government is a very slow-moving beast. In Australia, we have government light. We are very fortunate to have a government that is still very much a perspective of a socialist democracy. We like to, as a government, solve problems. We like to say that we work with community. We like to say that we interface with industry. We have good legislation and good legislative processes. So you can come to the government and say, we've noticed X, we don't have a policy to help with that. And there's also some really interesting public-private partnerships that, to some degree, are working. I want to have a look at some of the bigger problems that we have in Australia. The most wicked problems that we have to deal with at the moment are climate change and extreme weather. People are losing their houses, they're sliding down the hill, they're being flooded out. Climate change is also creating drought situations. We have housing affordability and homelessness challenges. We have social inequality and poverty. Mental health and well-being is a big wicked problem. Disasters and risk management, health access and affordability, and crime and community safety. Now, if you had to close your eyes and imagine who is working on this, it is not government that is working on this. It is the third sector and other organisations. I chair an organisation at the moment called the Australian Dark Skies Alliance. You may not be aware, but the fastest growing pollution in the world right now is light pollution, and it has extremely detrimental impacts on particularly plants and animals. And it's really important to solve that. So we wrote a white paper, and then we have collaborated with government, and we've developed a national standard, and that's now being adopted at a state level and then rolled out into local government now. That is government collaborating with not-for-profits and scientists and communities to create policy that supports better practice. But the big challenge for government to be able to work on complex problems is the fact that portfolios and responsibility are siloed into responsibilities of ministers. To solve these wicked problems, you need to work across these portfolios, and unless ministers get on well and their staff get on well, then we have immediate structural challenges to be able to solve wicked problems. How do we solve this problem? You've got to think like water. Where are the cracks? How do you seep through and infiltrate and use osmosis? One of the things we found as a not-for-profit in that space is that we organise a conference and we invite everyone from both sides together. We demonstrate that there's a problem. They all agree there's a problem. And then we say, this is how you should work together. And then we hope that plants the seed. Where do you do that stimulus to get these collaborations or to make people realise it's possible to work together? The other problem we have with government is that wicked problems are very hard to cost, but there's a fiscal responsibility and a transparency that government needs to have. Often when working on a wicked problem, you can't have that transparency up front. And I think the best way that government deals with that is by allocating grants to other organisations to deliver solutions to problems. For example, I've got a great project we're working on at a state government level at the moment. We're solving Indigenous employment. We're restructuring Eastern Suburbs community of plants that's endangered, and we're solving about 4 other social problems at the same time. Government couldn't deliver that project. It's a very wicked project. We're solving multiple challenges, both environmental and social, but we can apply to a grant and then the accountability falls on us, not the government. The other problem for government is that wicked problems are generally polarising to communities. And governments are very clear that they want to get re-elected. So how community will vote will taint the enthusiasm of a government to tackle a big, difficult, wicked problem. There's a great book by Brian Head called Wicked Problems in Public Policy. It says there's 7 strategies to deal with wicked problems. And the first time you read it, you go, oh my God, there's only 2 in there that I'd want to be doing. The first strategy for a wicked problem is to avoid it or deny it. And I think one of the most beautiful examples of that is our former Prime Minister sitting with a big lump of coal in Parliament, just saying, no, there is no climate change, and coal and petrochemical industry is not a problem. We have climate change. We need to accept that. You can't solve a problem until you accept that it is a problem. So he did not have the political appetite to accept that there was climate change because it didn't fit with their agenda and the people they were representing as elected representatives. You can take an authoritative or coercive control approach. Now, we've seen that in New South Wales through the banning of public protests. When people want to raise that there is a wicked problem that needs solving, if they're not getting the response that they want, they will do a public protest. It's a fantastic way of raising awareness. So the best way to deny it is to put an authoritative coercive control over the top of it. Micromanagement of problem elements. And I think particularly in Indigenous policy, and also I think with robo-debt, you can put a micromanagement of the problem so that it looks like it's being dealt with, but it's actually just being suppressed. So it's not an effective way to deal with a wicked problem. Technocratic problem solving, that sort of sits in the public-private partnerships, and sometimes that works, but the majority of the time it doesn't. Again, it hides the problem or creates more problems. And one of the biggest challenges when you're dealing with a wicked problem is that any approach you take will create new problems, and you're trying to get a net gain. So if your new problems create an even greater problem, then you have failed. Incremental adjustment. Medicare sits there. Every time Medicare is not quite doing what we want, we just nudge it forward a little bit more, but we never take the bold move to really do what we need to do, which is a huge overhaul of the Medicare policies. Stakeholder collaboration is where you want to be sitting. So you want to be working with communities. And up until probably about 5 years ago, we were using human-centered design methods in solving wicked problems. And we're now shifting very much into planet-centered design. And we're now creating personas for the environment or species that need to be saved. Taking that anthropogenic bias out and looking at stakeholders not only as humans, but also ecosystems and systems is really important. I think a good stakeholder collaboration, whilst not perfect, is the NDIS. So it fits pretty well and it's having a lot of benefit, and it's been done very much in line with stakeholder collaboration methods. And then we have coping strategies, and I think our pharmaceutical benefits scheme is a really good example of a coping strategy. So we let everyone pay as much as they can until the cost of living gets too high, and a few people die or get really sick, and there's the media around it. So we just put another Band-Aid on it, discount one thing and keep going, and then it looks like we're doing something. So again, really, if you want to tackle a wicked problem properly, you're going to sit here at that stakeholder collaboration level and try and fix things using this model. So what does that look like? Systems are dynamic things. Systems grow, systems shrink, and systems are interconnected and very much on a 3D level. So every time you mess with a system, they're in fine balance. You pull one part out or you play with one part of that system, you're going to have impacts of other systems. Did anyone play Kaplunk when they were little? So you keep pulling the straws out until the whole thing collapses, or it's a bit like Jenga. And I think this is where it gets wicked. So there's only so many changes to a system that you can make until the system starts showing strain or wear or imbalance. Now, you may want to be what we call an invagination in the system. So it's a great word. In biological science, if you get a splinter or have an injury and it gets infected and it blows up and it explodes and then it heals over and it's really revolting, it's stronger than it was before you started. So sometimes breaking the system and then letting it fix or helping it get fixed actually creates a stronger system. So sometimes if you've got this balance, you might need to let the whole thing topple over to be able to fix that wicked problem. But how do you manage that? And particularly from a government perspective, I don't think that any government would have an appetite to break an entire system because there's so many people at risk of being impacted. You can do it in a small system. You can't do it in a large system full of people. I think this is a great quote from the World Health Organization. Addressing wicked problems requires a high level of systems thinking. If there's a single lesson to be drawn from the first decade of the 21st century, it's that surprise, instability, and extraordinary change will continue to be regular features of our lives. Now, what's really interesting is that systems thinking predates complexity theory from an academic perspective. And there's a reason. It's because systems were simple and then they got complex. And then we had to develop more refined theories to be able to deal with that level of complexity. And the tools that you use to deal with complexity are tools where you can reflect and then simplify the complex systems that you're dealing with. And they're the ones that we tend to seek out, particularly in design thinking, to clarify our thinking. And it's a little bit like panning for gold. When you get a highly qualified team in to work on a change project that's going to deliver you a shift in outcome, you really need to trust their expertise to deliver an outcome and to not have to know what that outcome is going to be. Now, for government, they need to know what the outcome is before you start the project. So if you can outsource these change type systems, change type projects, but support them as a government, then you don't have to wear that ambiguity that goes with managing those projects. You dig up your dirt, you shift it, you do all your actions, you know there'll be some gold in the pan. How does the government create space and faith in the economy to allow people to run through these ambiguous processes without knowing exactly what the end will be, but knowing what the goal is, which is a gain in some way? Now, the Kinefin framework, it's misused all the time and overly lent on. But I think the very first step as a decision maker is to work out what type of problem am I working with, because then you can talk about the strategy that you're going to take. So if you need a framework to do that, this is the framework that everyone uses. It's popular at Harvard Business School. It's popular everywhere. This helps you understand the type of problem. And then by having what we call a theory of change, you've got a story that you can convincingly go to people or the government and say, we've got this group of people and we've got this environment. This group of people has employment issues. The environment is suffering. We can train these people to do the actions that need to fix the environmental issue. We will marry them together. Please give us the money in your grant. This is where the government can actually provide support and bring together stakeholders. If you can break it down into simple language and a very clear argument, then the theory of change is good. Then if you want to get into the details, then you can give yourself what's called a program logic model to look at it more closely. Government is very interested in outcomes. Outcomes come from outputs. Outputs are what you're going to deliver through your theory of change. And your outputs will then create short, medium, and long-term outcomes. It's the long-term outcomes that are the sticky outcomes, and wicked problems need sticky solutions. So if you think about a wicked problem, you need a sticky solution. A sticky solution is a solution that stays and sticks and becomes future practice. And because we live in dynamic systems, that won't work forever, but it will work for a period of time. So we're iterating ourselves forward through these actions. Now, I really want you to think about, when is it government's role to bring stakeholders together? When should they be included? And what are the structural barriers, and how can you identify those to have the most productive conversations with stakeholders, including government?